Taoiseach, Ministers, ladies and gentlemen, good morning to all of you. My name is Mark Griffin, Secretary-General of the Department of Communications, Climate Action and Environment. On behalf of the Minister and the Department, I am delighted to welcome you all to this Project Ireland 2040 event. And I'd particularly like to thank Smock Alley Theatre for hosting us today. This is my first time here, and I have to say I've been particularly wowed by the venue. Today's proceedings are being recorded and will be made available on the Department's website. The 2016 Programme for Government recognises that there are policy challenges which require long-term planning, a structured approach to delivery and the development of a broad-based consensus at political and public level. One such challenge identified in the Programme for Government is climate change. We have seen the public consensus on the need for taking action on climate change emerge from the work of the Citizens' Assembly, and I'd like to welcome members of the Assembly who joined us here today. The political consensus and drive for action has been most recently demonstrated in the commitment to investment of almost €22 billion under Strategic Outcome 8 in the National Development Plan, transitioning to a low-carbon and climate-resilient society. Today's event focuses on strategies to engage society and communities in climate action. Our two panel sessions will draw from the experience and expertise of individuals working across the public sector, enterprise, community groups and academia. Panel 1 will focus on how to engage society with the challenge of climate change. Our second panel will then address how, once engaged with that challenge, citizens can be empowered to act, focusing especially on the role of expenditure policy, taxation measures and regulation in underpinning climate action. So I think what we have ahead of us this morning are two really interesting panel sessions, and I'm hoping for a great debate and great engagement from yourselves in the audience this morning. Before we hear from our Taoiseach and Ministers, I'd like to share a short video we have produced to outline the NDP investment in climate action.
There's no doubt that Ireland faces enormous challenges in meeting our climate change objectives. But this government is determined to take decisive action to meet those challenges head-on. Project Ireland 2040 is building on the work that the government has already done, strengthening that, working with communities across this country to ensure that we deliver on our objectives and go on from that to meet the global goals in relation to climate change.
Climate action is a priority for government. Future generations and indeed the future of our planet depends on decisions that we make now. So Project Ireland 2040 sets out our ambition to make the transition to a low-carbon society and a low-carbon economy as well. Government's going to lead, but we're going to need everyone involved, business, communities and individuals as well.
Ireland 2040. A country where sustainable infrastructure supports families and communities across generations. Where we are empowered to harness our renewable resources. A low-carbon society supported by digital innovation and connectivity. Project Ireland 2040 is our plan to make this future a reality. Individuals, communities and businesses across Ireland are charting a course towards a sustainable future together. Today, government is engaging with communities and businesses, turning innovative ideas into practical action together. 2040. A new Ireland, where low carbon and climate aware is more than a goal. It's a way of life.
I'd now like to invite on Taoiseach Leo Varadkar to give his address.
Thanks very much, first of all, and good morning and welcome to Smock Alley Theatre. I have to say I really love this space. I think it's one of the one of the nicest ones in Dublin, and really nice for an event of any nature. I also want to apologise for the all-male panel. That's not supposed to happen anymore. Something I'm working on, I promise. But I do want to say that I'm really delighted to be here with ministers to kick off what is going to be an important discussion on the role that communities have to play in delivering on our climate action ambitions contained in Project Ireland 2040. I want to thank Minister Naughton and his department for organising this event, and of course all of the panellists who are taking part during the day. Climate change is, I believe, one of the existential challenges of our generation, and it's our job to protect our planet and to make it healthy and great again. Our guiding principle is that we want to hand over guardianship and stewardship of our planet to our grandchildren in a much better state than we inherited it. Ireland is a small country, but I think we have a big role to play in meeting this challenge, both at home and on the world stage. And as you've seen on the video, communities and community engagement needs to be at the heart of Project Ireland 2040, which is the government's €116 billion 10-year plan to invest in our public infrastructure, whether it's transport, healthcare, education facilities, climate change, broadband or housing. These investments will take our entire country forward and balance rural and urban investment and prepare us for future economic challenges and opportunities. Of course, sometimes when you talk about 2040 and when you talk about 10-year plans, people can naturally become instantly sceptical. It's all mañana. It's going to happen in 10 years' time, 20 years' time. That isn't the case. Project Ireland 2040, our ramping up of investment in public infrastructure, is already happening. This year so far, we've spent 18% more on investing in public infrastructure compared to this time last year. And next year alone, there'll be a 25% increase. That's 1.5 billion in investment in public infrastructure. And you can start to see it all around you. The increase in house building, 45% more last year than the year before. Still from a low base, but going in the right direction. The fact that our Lewises are now connected. The fact that the Children's Hospital is now under construction. The satellite unit in Blanchardstown is now on the 3rd story. These are things that you can believe are happening because you can see them happening. And people seriously starting to get concerned about Metro Link and Bus Connects because they know it's going to happen. And these things are going to happen. So what we want to achieve is compact urban growth. We want to achieve sustainable mobility within and between our cities, and we want to strengthen our rural economies and communities. One of its objectives is to enable Ireland's transition to a low-carbon and climate-resilient society. So Project Ireland provides for an unprecedented investment of 22 billion in climate action over the next 10 years, the largest single package within the plan. It's a step change in public investment in climate change, and it's only now possible because we've got the economy back on track, approaching full employment, an economy that's growing rapidly, a balanced budget. And if we ever go off that course, it'll be very difficult to honour this commitment, but I'm determined that we will stay on the right course economically. It's also a huge commitment of public resources to decarbonising our economy and society. However, it won't be enough on its own. The transition to a low-carbon world will require profound changes in how we live our lives, and that will only be possible with the support of communities and individuals. The government doesn't underestimate the scale of this challenge for a second. We acknowledge that we have a longer journey to travel than many other countries, for reasons to do with the nature of our economy and the stage of economic development, our large agricultural sector, and the fact that we didn't have many dirty industries to close down. Earlier this year, I talked about the need for Ireland to become a leader in climate action, and I meant it, but I don't underestimate the challenge, nor the low starting point that we're embarking from. The investment under Project Ireland 2040 will help us to bring us towards our national transition objective. In practice, it means many things. A nationwide ban on smoky coal, for example, later this year. From next year, all new buses bought for Bus Éireann and Dublin Bus will be low-emission or no-emission vehicles. In 2025, taking coal off the grid and moving Moneypoint from coal to a different fuel. Taking peat off the grid and also banning diesel and petrol cars car tailpipes from 2030, investment in things like renewable heating, and also deep retrofit of public buildings and homes. It'll also mean carbon pricing and increases in carbon tax. But this will have to be done in a slow and steady way, in phases, so it doesn't cost jobs, reduce living standards, or increase poverty. However, the challenge presented by climate change requires much more than this. It requires significant behavioural change and some difficult trade-offs by government, business, communities and individuals. It requires real citizen and community engagement, from planning for renewable energy projects through individual purchasing decisions, and it requires us to work collaboratively so that we capitalise on the ideas and expertise that exist in different sectors and disciplines. And that's really what today is all about. It's about building on the National Mitigation Plan, on the National Dialogue on Climate Change, which is meeting this weekend in Athlone, on the recommendations of the Citizens' Assembly to talk about how we can better empower communities to participate in climate action efforts. In terms of collaboration, the 4 competitive funds under Project Ireland 2040 have a major role to play. These have a combined commitment of €4 billion for collaborative projects to deliver on Project Ireland's objectives, climate action being among those, particularly through the dedicated Climate Action Fund, which is being funded by the Nora levy, a levy on fossil fuels. It is fitting that this event is taking place today here in Smock Alley, a place that has long played a central role in Dublin and Ireland's history. It has a great story to tell, because this place is all about community engagement. In fact, it was the community of Dublin, people from all walks of life, who made contributions large and small to fund this theatre when it first opened in 1662, the first custom-built theatre in the city, in fact. And theatre has long been known for its capacity to hold up a mirror to society, highlighting both its strengths and weaknesses. And I think today's event allows us to hold up a mirror so we can see what we are doing to our planet and how we could do things differently. So let's take this opportunity, and thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Taoiseach. Taoiseach, Ministers, Deputy Hildegard Naughton, Chair of the Oireachtas Committee, ladies and gentlemen. We're here today to show that this government means business when it comes to taking strong action on climate change. I'm very pleased to host today's event alongside my Cabinet colleagues, 6 Cabinet colleagues here today. Minister Murphy had to rush back to the Dáil where he's on parliamentary questions, but I think with the 6 of us, I think we have a quorum to hold a Cabinet meeting here today. So it just shows the commitment of this government and demonstrates that climate change is truly a cross-cutting issue right across government, and we are taking a whole-of-government approach to this issue. There's no question that we are a country playing catch-up on our obligations in relation to climate change. The recent EPA figures produced by Laura Burke and her team show that Ireland's emissions and emissions trajectory is deeply disappointing. But this, I believe, is as much our opportunity as our obligation. In any event, it is a moral necessity and a vital national interest. Effective change is putting the levers for climate action into people's hands. Delivery requires fundamental transformation in our thinking, and Project Ireland 2040 represents a significant step change in our approach, both in terms of scale of our ambition and the funding that we are making available as a government to meet those challenges. This government has been criticised for its lack of ambition, for its failure to meet the 2020 targets. Project Ireland 2040 provides that ambition, practical, implementable ambition that we can all work together to achieve. From the most isolated rural home in the Beara Peninsula in West Cork to the tech giants here in the Silicon Docks. Over the next decade, Project Ireland 2040 sets out a €22,000 million climate-focused investment plan. That's 1 in every €5 that will be spent by the state and state companies over the next decade. This is not just significant in European terms, this is significant in global terms. In the coming weeks, we'll commence a nationwide ban on the sale of smoky coal, becoming the first country in Europe to do so. We expect, based on the €4,000 million investment in energy efficiency upgrades of buildings, that within the next 200 months, dirty fossil fuels will be taken out of our heating systems, including our homes. And that will be an achievement on global scale in terms of the fact that 37% of our population live in rural areas. We'll have dirty fossil fuels taken out of electricity generation by 2030 at the latest. And we're banning the sale of new cars with tailpipes from 2030. On top of all of this investment, bringing high-speed broadband to every home and business in Ireland will reduce travel journeys in rural Ireland, not just to work, but for education, for medical appointments, and for access to government services. Over the next decade, we will produce 55% of our electricity from renewable sources, which will be a phenomenal feat in light of the fact that we're an isolated electricity grid. In fact, Ireland is currently the global leader today in electricity grid management of renewable energy. And we want to become a global leader in food waste management. The €500 million Climate Change Fund is the biggest per capita fund of its type in the world, and we're already receiving international interest in this fund. And that will build on some of the innovative schemes that we've already established in terms of the Beef Data and Genomics Scheme, genotyping and getting the genetic makeup of 1 million beef animals, never been done anywhere on our planet to date. The Warmth and Wellbeing Pilot Scheme here in this city, which is looking at the health outcomes on foot of doing deep retrofits of homes, which already has international interest in the outcomes of that, which we hope to publish at the end of the summer. The Smart Farming Initiative to reduce farm emissions by 10% while increasing profitability for farmers. These are of European, if not global, significance. Our Smart Grid and DS3 project is at the cutting edge of technology in relation to electricity management. And our state-funded tidal research has led to the first purpose-built tidal turbine manufacturing facility opened in Cherbourg last Thursday, supporting jobs in Greenore in County Louth. But the big difference between the promises that have been made in the past, the commitments that have been made in the past, and what we're doing here today is that we're backing up those commitments with cash. 1 in €5 of government spending over the next decade going into this area. With the smartest grid in the world, and with every home with high-speed broadband, and an open access climate fund, we have an opportunity to become the global climate innovation hub. The Climate Fund of €500 million will be opened within the coming weeks, and that is a blank canvas for anyone here in Ireland to come forward with an innovative idea to meet our climate and energy efficiency targets. A blank canvas for anyone in with global interest to come here to Ireland and to try out an initiative here that will have a direct impact on our overall emissions. Projects ranging from energy off the west coast of Ireland, to electrifying our bus fleet, to heating our homes and businesses using farm and food waste. That opportunity is there for small rural communities and for big global businesses. This fund is a new way of thinking. It's a new way of problem solving in communities on the issue of climate and our environment. And I believe the fund will stimulate innovative ideas and deliver concrete projects that will contribute towards our 2030, our 2040 and our global 2050 climate goals. Government expenditure alone is neither affordable or sufficient to meet the scale of the climate challenge ahead. We need to target that with a balance between government expenditure, private expenditure, taxation, regulation and behavioural change. We're looking at climate-focused taxation and regulatory measures to encourage more sustainable behaviours. The Taoiseach mentioned earlier that we're going to commence the National Dialogue on Climate Action in Athlone this weekend. And that's about bringing individuals and communities with us right across the country, because government alone cannot deal with the scale of the challenge that we have here in Ireland or that we have internationally. We're kicking off the regional meetings, as I say, in Athlone on Saturday. And we're picking that location because that is the centre point of the communities that have seen the greatest impact in relation to climate change to date in terms of flooding. Communities across this country have seen firsthand the impact of climate change here in Ireland. And what we want to do is to work with communities, work with individuals, small rural communities, towns and villages across this country, working with the Climate Action regional offices that I established earlier this year to come forward with constructive, innovative solutions, to get people to buy in to the overall framework that we're now driving here in this country, that we're working with our European colleagues on, and that we're working internationally on. And I think that we have an opportunity now to move from being seen as the laggards in Europe in relation to climate action, to becoming not just the European leaders, but global leaders in some of the areas where we have already built up our expertise. Garamila Mahagod. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Minister. I understand that the Taoiseach has to return to the day job in Leinster House, so we might excuse the Taoiseach at this stage and thank him for his participation this morning, which has been really valuable to see that leadership at the top level of the political system on an issue as important as climate action. Next speaker is Minister for Finance and Public Expenditure, Paschal Donoghue TD, who will be followed by Michael Creed, the Minister for Transport, and then Minister Ross will wrap up the ministerial addresses, unless you've arranged an alternative rota between yourself. Mr. Donoghue.
Well, good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and good morning, ministers. And it's a pleasure to be here with you all this morning in this fantastic room. I'm really going to just make 4 points for consideration across the morning that will be important to me in choices that I have made and other choices that are available to make across the coming period. And I'll make those choices in the vein of the challenge and commitment that has been articulated by the Taoiseach and by Minister Naughton here this morning. The Taoiseach acknowledged where we stand in relation to this existential challenge for our planet, in relation to the challenge and opportunities that it poses for us as a country. And then Minister Naughton was very clear in describing this as a challenge that is not only in our national interest, but also a moral obligation that we have to respond back to. And that is an assessment that is offered by both of them, that as Minister for Finance and Public Expenditure I agree with. I look at where we stand, both socially, economically and morally, versus the obligations that are there. And I look at the progress that we need to make to respond back to existing obligations, let alone future obligations that I know are being negotiated by Minister Naughton and his team. And inside that framework, there are 4 points that I'd like to offer to you for your deliberation today. I'll be interested in your feedback on them, and I'll stay for what I can of the session that will be taking place across the morning. The first point is to reiterate a point that was made by the Taoiseach earlier on. From an expenditure point of view, and in terms of the commitment of resources, what is now taking place is very different to the promise of additional resources to come at some point in the future, at an unspecified time, at an unspecified level. If we look at where we are now, capital and public investment in public capital for this year alone will be 800 million more than it was last year. Investment in public capital for next year will be 1.5 billion euro more than it stands for this year. So between this year and next year, we will see investment in our public capital, in our stock of public goods, increased by more than €2 billion than our starting point for last year. And key areas that are receiving this higher level of investment are responding back to the agenda that has been articulated by Minister Ross and trying to make quicker progress from an expenditure point of view on many of the items that have been articulated by Minister Naughton here today. So we went through a period of deserved public analysis regarding our low level of investment in our capital stock. What we now need to appreciate is this is something that we are looking to change and are changing across both 2018 and 2019. And as we move into the very early 2020s, which is after all only a very short time period away, we'll move our public investment as a percentage of gross national income from being below the European average to slightly ahead of the European average, as we look to deliver a very quick period of catch-up versus where we have been in the past. The second point I want to emphasise here is that this is not just a matter of what we want to do this year and next year. It's giving clarity regarding what our resource commitments will be in key strategic areas across the next decade. So what I have done for some key areas, and climate change is a key area, is we have agreed with Minister Naughton from a resourcing point of view, not only where his department will stand for this year and next year, but where they will be for the next decade. So all of the figures that Minister Naughton has talked about here today are figures that we have now agreed from an expenditure point of view for the next decade. And that level of pre-planning reflects the seriousness with which the Taoiseach and I are looking to respond back to the challenge that we have. But that leads on to the third point, which is that this is a challenge that cannot be met just by what we aim to do from an expenditure point of view. I spend each day dealing with all of the trade-offs in relation to how we manage our economy. I spend each day hearing each sector what they want to deliver for their part of the economy. But of course, my challenge and the challenge of government is to bring this forward in an integrated way. There are few areas in which this is more challenging than climate change. So what we need to do as we look at our expenditure commitments is additional expenditure commitments cannot take the place of poor planning decisions in the future. And that is why what Ireland 2040 is delivering is so important. Because what it is looking to do is integrate planning decisions with resource commitment. If we look at planning decisions that were made in the past, we know now, versus the climate commitments that we have to deal with, that they're not getting us to the place they need us to. Why Ireland 2040 is so important is it's looking to integrate planning decisions into how we allocate the resources of the taxpayer. And while I am committed to the additional expenditure which I've outlined, which moves us ahead of the European average in a number of key areas, this will only work if we have a full society commitment to integrated planning decisions that ensure, for example, that making good decisions in public transport are integrated into good decisions regarding where we build new homes, new offices, new public facilities. And that's a key element of Ireland 2040 because that is what it looks to do. Which leads to my final point regarding the other area that I'm responsible for, which is crucially what we want to do from a taxation point of view across the coming period. And this is an area that I'd be very interested in hearing the views of the group from and the views of other stakeholders, particularly next week on our National Economic Dialogue, which will be taking place in Dublin Castle. We have made resource allocation decisions. I've laid out my commitment and the commitment of the government to how we increase public capital now in this area across the next decade. We've laid out how we want to integrate this with better planning decisions. Now what I want to hear are the views of colleagues and the views of stakeholders in relation to the role of taxation in relation to this. And of course, it's when we come into taxation that we will in particular deal with many of the trade-offs that are inherent, indeed, in an economy that will have more people at work in it than it's ever had before. That it is now dealing with the trade-offs regarding how we balance our books versus dealing with many of the public capital demands that I'm having to respond back to. And climate change is an area in which those trade-offs will also be very apparent, which we need to reflect upon. We need to ensure that all of the policy decisions that we are making are integrated, that they respond back to the challenges that we have from a climate change and from a planning point of view. And what I want to do through Ireland 2040 is deliver integrated decisions in relation to the planning and allocation of the money of the Irish taxpayer. And what I'm looking forward to doing now across the coming months is hearing the views of all of you, both here and in the National Economic Dialogue, as to what further we can do to respond back to what Minister Naughton correctly described as being something that's not only in our national interest to respond to, but also a moral obligation. Thank you.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, Cabinet colleagues, Deputy Hildegard Naughton, Chairman of the Oireachtas Climate Change Committee. I'm also very pleased to be here because I think I also recognise as Minister for Agriculture that it will take a whole-of-government approach to achieve the very significant challenges that we face as a country to reduce our emissions in the agriculture sector and across society generally. And I think it's through that whole-of-government approach that can be achieved. But government can only achieve so much. It will also require the mobilisation of communities and society generally, and I'm pleased to acknowledge all of the key stakeholders as well as the various department officials, non-governmental organisations and agencies that are also going to be key to achieving that societal objective that we are morally obliged as well as for financial reasons equally obliged to achieve. And the theme for today of empowering communities for climate action, in the context of my own departmental responsibility, it's particularly in rural communities, though not exclusively. And I appreciate that by empowering those communities and those farming communities in particular, that we can achieve the objectives that we have set for ourselves. By supporting and empowering communities, we not only make progress in meeting our strategic outcome of a low-carbon, climate-resilient society, but across a number of strategic outcomes such as strengthening rural economies and communities, sustainable management of water and other environmental resources, and making a positive contribution to natural amenity areas and biodiversity, we must and will also achieve all of those objectives. In practice, this means we need to explore all options. This fund that we are launching today could result in support for projects which would crystallise a future in which biogas is produced from agricultural residuals, or where our homes and farms become net exporters of electricity through the adaptation of smart metering, smart grids and small-scale renewable technologies. These are exciting, significant and viable options, and I encourage full engagement of interested parties with the application process. Ladies and gentlemen, agriculture serves multiple objectives, and our farmers and rural communities are custodians of the land. How we farm is important. Getting it right can impact positively on our environment, our economy, and our society. The pathway to a low-carbon transition in the agricultural sector is based on an approach to carbon neutrality, which crucially does not threaten our capacity for sustainable food production. We have an economy that is heavily reliant on agriculture, and while we have been very successful at decoupling emissions from output, I am very aware that in recent years we have seen an increase in our overall emissions. Reducing emissions is challenging, but it is a challenge that the sector has been working hard to address. Just last week, my department hosted an environmental sustainability dialogue, which was attended by a considerable number of stakeholders, including representatives from government departments and agencies, industry and NGOs, many of whom are here today. I think the level of seriousness with which the climate challenge is taken was evidenced by the large attendance and the air of collaboration and openness to discussion on how we can collectively contribute to positive climate change. The recently published TAGASC report, Analysis of Abatement Potential of Greenhouse Gas Emissions in Irish Agriculture 2021 to 2030, identifies a number of different abatement measures that could be employed to reduce emissions. These measures would either reduce emissions of methane and nitrous oxide from agriculture or increase the level of carbon sequestration through additional forestry and bioenergy production. The sector is unique in that it can sequester emissions through increasing forest cover and better management of grassland and cropland soils, and also has a critical role to play in helping meet renewable energy targets, particularly heat. My department is a strong supporter of climate change research relevant to Irish agri-food sector and our potential contribution to the climate change challenge. In conclusion, it is my hope that initiatives like the launch of this fund today will provide real choices to rural communities and deliver opportunities to grow and develop while maintaining their distinctive rural character. I reiterate my earlier point. It is through action at community level that we can best preserve the landscape and protect air and water quality, whilst also providing for recreation and tourism that will provide investments into the local economy. Thank you very much.
Ministers, ladies and gentlemen, as I was about to say before, I was so rudely interrupted by Pascal O'Donoghue and Michael Creed. It is a great honour to be here today, and I apologise to the Minister of Finance for trying to put rank on him. But we did have an agreement. Actually, we go in order, and it seems to have changed. But it doesn't dilute the strength or the unity of the message which we have here today, which is a recognition of the seriousness with which we address this issue across the various departments, and a recognition of the fact that for Ireland we're not champions of the league, but that we're determined to prove ourselves a great crusaders for the environment, and to recognise the difficulties and the challenges ahead under this particular government. As we've heard here this morning, combating climate change is a significant challenge. The climate measures and policies we implement today will have consequences for Ireland for decades to come. So Project 2040 is pivotal, clearly establishing our national commitment to the right spatial planning and the capital investment needed to support our projected population and employment growth in a sustainable manner. Without intervention, transport emissions will increase as our population and economy continues to grow. With 20% of Irish emissions, and as the third largest emitting sector, transport must do better. We know that internationally it's accepted that both the transport and agricultural sectors are the most structurally difficult and resistant to emission reduction. But the time is now. Given the scale of our challenge, we must commit to being more innovative and to work harder in these areas. I fully recognise the important role that the transport sector needs to play in stepping up to the plate. I am pleased that through Project 2040, we are nationally looking to reconcile our mobility needs with our climate obligations, and that we are seriously committing to integrating land use and spatial planning so that we can support public transport, walking and cycling as real alternatives to the private car. There's clear evidence of that trend and that commitment in Project 2040. Settlement patterns strongly influence how people travel. The provision of sustainable transport options is only realistic when populations are located close to where people work, go to school, shop and socialise. In Budget 2018, we began the process of investing wisely to increase capacity and enhance the range of alternatives to the car. Project 2040 will further build upon this investment with developments such as the new Metrolink and DART expansion in Dublin, and more widely the Bus Connects programme. We will also start our decisive shift away from carbon-intensive transport by electrifying more of the rail network, with a commitment to stop buying diesel-only buses, and through earmarking investments to support the transition to zero-emission capable cars, with a bold target of 500,000 EVs on Irish roads by 2030. To date, we have put in place an attractive array of incentives to encourage motorists to make the switch to electric. And this is supported by an extensive recharging network, which we are now investing in upgrading and expanding. Market take-up was initially slow, but the pace, as the Taoiseach alluded to, is accelerating rapidly, with more EVs sold in the first 4 months of 2018 than in all of 2017. The emissions reduction dividends from the switch to EVs will take time to accrue, but the pathway is now being clearly established. Meanwhile, we cannot ignore the sizable existing vehicle fleet and the key role played by better efficiencies and increased biofuel use in delivering sustained transport emission reductions. I will continue to push strongly for better EU vehicle standards, and I also firmly and without reservation support Minister Naughton's intention to increase the rate of biofuels in the national mix. Overall, I think it's fair to say that some positive emission reduction measures have been taken in the transport sector to date, that more are underway, and that even more are needed in the future. Collectively, these actions will move us towards achieving our long-term vision of a low-carbon society. It will not be easy, and it will require a fundamental societal transformation, political sacrifices, but with the substantial investment and through the focus given by Project 2040, we can expect to see changes in the transport sector as it steps up its efforts to reduce its impact on climate. Thank you for your attention. I hope you enjoy the rest of this morning's event. Thank you very much.